Okay, so we're talking of films like Sister Stella L, Kapit sa Patalim. That's the one produced by Tony Gonzalez. What else? Bangkang Papel. I mean, 84 was really a year in ferment because in 1983, Ninoy Aquino got assassinated. And that was, of course, that changed the whole political landscape. You know who Ninoy Aquino is? You know, the former senator who had been the chief adversary of President Marcos, who might have succeeded him had he not been for martial law. And so in August 21, 1983, he came home from the States, from exile, and he said something like, before coming, he said something like, the Filipinos were dying for. And then when he came down from the airport, the tarmac, he was shot at the back of the head. Of course, that was news all over the world because it was a very direct and blatant political assassination. And yet, of course, the government, especially the president, said, who, me? I mean, I didn't know anything about it. Maybe he has other enemies. And of course, that created so much ferment and so much anger. I can remember the Christmas of 1983, 84, especially 84, was one of the bleakest Christmases because people were just angry, And of course, as a result of the assassination, people were angry, and especially here in Metro Manila, that there were rallies, there were gatherings all over. And despite a controlled press, because martial law was already over, but still, the effects were still there. The press was not free. A lot of things in media developed. No? I mean, television was controlled. Censorship of films was controlled. And then suddenly you have kind of an underground media that sprouted up. There already was, but I think it all came together and all, kind of gathered together because of the assassination. Yes, so the so-called underground, the Mosquito Press, self-published newspapers that came out and were being distributed or being sold right in the newsstands. Of course, television was controlled, so there was no way you could get in unless you had some sympathizer of a TV host making. And of course, news was highly controlled. But people would use alternative media, like, for example, making a videotape, Betamax. So there was a kind of a underground Betamax scene in which people would just film their videos of certain subject matter, political subject matter, and pass it around. So that's why all these alternative film and filmmakers making highly politicized films came up with their companies, Alter Horizons, the group of Lito Chongson, Rose Roque would tell you better things because she's really studied all of this. But I was there. I met many of these people. I knew many of them.
And writers like Pete LaCaba, they're, I guess, kind of inserting political content into mainstream films as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, both of them were the right people to do this because both had been imprisoned during the earlier years of martial law. Mm-hmm. In fact, Pete LaCaba's brother was salvaged. That's a term for being politically killed for political purposes, supposedly a communist. But they didn't go underground. Pete LaCaba, especially Ricky Lee also, especially Pete LaCaba, they stayed within the mainstream. They still had normal lives. They didn't go to the mountains or join the communists, the Red Movement, things like that. So they still stayed as normal citizens. And of course, because their views were highly politicized, and they got to be called by producers to write some of the scripts, films that had highly political content, especially, I think, Pete LaCaba. Because he was really well qualified person, in terms of his life.
So LaCaba works on a bunch of these films I'm interested in. He works on Signos. He translates a poem by Brecht to posterity. Can you talk a little bit about Signos, and then maybe we can move on to the...
Signos is an example of these underground videos. But the chief instigator was actually Mike De Leon. And which is strange because Mike De Leon actually comes from a privileged family. Landed, very rich. He's not at all a left-wing kind of artist or what. Nor does he have sympathies. But you have to go back earlier to 1982. An organization called the Concerned Artists of the Philippines was formed. Have you heard of that group?
Yes.
It's still very active today. It's still urging people to do things, attend these rallies, know about certain issues. Because Concerned Artists of the Philippines actually started out as a group of two, mainly Mike De Leon and Lino Broca. At that time, Lino Broca, of course, wasn't yet the Lino Broca that we all know now, the firebrand, the revolutionary, the contrarian. He was just starting to learn things. But Mike De Leon actually had an experience already back in the late 70s or early 80s when he came back from a film festival abroad. And somehow his passport was confiscated. I don't know the exact details now. Or he had been kind of censured for something that he said unwittingly, and innocuously about the Philippine government under Marcos. Well, he said it at some film festival, and somebody had recorded or took notice or and reported it. There were actually people who would report things. Oh, this guy said something. Oh my God, you have to watch out for that. And there was, of course, a lot of red baiting. Yeah, and for good reason, because there really were a lot of people in the underground who were against the government. Of course, many of them are out there in the mountains, fighting. And those who are here, actually, you might say they supplied the content. And those in the countryside, they did the struggle. The thing is, Broca and Mike De Leon got together much earlier. And this is part of history that people don't know. They think it just, the concerned artists of the Philippines just sprang up. And there was Broca, there was Mike De Leon, there was Lacaba. And in fact, they think Lacaba was the key figure. No, it was Mike De Leon who was so disgusted in 1982 because of the conduct of the Manila International Film Festival. Now, I'm trying to recall whether it was 1982 or 83. You've heard about the notorious Manila International Film Festival?
Yes, yeah.
Wherein they were trying to set up this big film building, and then because of the rush, the cement was still fresh, and then it collapsed, and several workers, laborers, were buried under the cement, which later on, of course, people found video footage, so it really happened. And it was at this point that I think, I know about this because I was working with Mike De Leon. We were actually working for the Manila International Film Festival.
Interesting.
We were doing the subtitles of the Filipino films that were going to be shown at the festival. There was a retrospective. I think this is 1983, yeah. And so while working for the festival, at the same time, Mike De Leon got very disgusted. Now, I forgot the details now of what issue exactly it was. He's still around, so, he's the best person to say it. Let's say maybe Mike got irked and hence politicized. And then he said, he told me. At that time, there was a Cold War between Lino and Mike. So they hadn't been talking to each other for months, if not years. Over certain incidents, of course, both of them are passionate. And I think they can also be impulsive. So I was working together with Mike. At the same time, I was going around picking up the films that, contacting the producers, getting permission. Hey, we're going to subtitle your films for the festival. Things like that. So I was in contact with some of the producers and directors and also with Lino Broca. Then Mike De Leon said, hey, so you're in touch with Lino. Can you go over and let him know that I want to talk to him? He wanted to bury the hatchet, whatever it was. And they discussed politics. They discussed this was early 83. And I talked to Lino. I said, hey, Mike wants to talk to you. Very important issue concerning the First Lady and Marcos, and all this. I think things were in the air, There was something that was about to heavy. That was something that was thick. Maybe, artists have a sense of foreboding. They can smell what's about to happen. Now, this is very personal, Because this is not, what I'm telling you is not written in any kind of histories, except a few people who will know, like Mike De Leon. So the two of them got together and they said, because Mike said, we should do something about what's been going on. What exactly has been going on because the film festival was January 1983. So that it was that early. It was before the assassination, which happened in August. And so they got together, they organized a group called Free the Artists. Okay, now I remember. It had to do with censorship. But exactly what, I don't recall now. Because both of them were filmmakers. And the two of them agreed that, hey, we should make a stand. We should make a show of force. And so they held a rally during the Manila International Film Festival. There were T-shirts with Free the Artists, ban censorship, something, things like that, being worn around by film workers. I mean, many of these workers actually were working with Mike De Leon. And then from there, I think along the way, Pete Lacaba came in. Pete was closer to Lino. And then things snowballed. And then the group became bigger, I think. With Pete, I think more people were recruited, Other artists, not just filmmakers. But what I told you was how it all started.
With De Leon burying the hatchet
Yes,
with Broca.
yes, and because of some censorship incident, I think I still have that T-shirt that I wore. It says "Ban the censors."
He would have been involved at this in
Ah,
82,
he was
83.
involved. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was also involved in the subtitling of those films.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
I think I can get in touch with him.
Yeah.
So Rose Roque tells me that Signos, a lot of the people who made Signos were on De Leon's crew when he was making Sister Stella.
Signos, I think, was. I'm not trying to remember. What year is Signos? 83 or 84?
I think it is 84. No, it has to be 83.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 83.
So Signos is earlier. It had nothing to do with Sister Stella L. And so, as like I said, this Free the Artist movement had snowballed and then eventually became the Concerned Artists of the Philippines. And up to now, it's still there. They actually hold office here in Quezon City. And so Mike De Leon gathered a bunch of people he knew. They're all in the credits of Signos. No?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've seen Signos. I'm sure you have access to it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Lito Chongson, Mike De Leon, Joe Quaresma, Ricky Lee, Pete Lacaba, Sylvia Mayuga, Ding
Pachacoso.
Chacoso, and Jovita Zarate.
That's his assistant director.
Ah.
Sylvia Mayuga is a writer and admirer of Mike De Leon during that time. So it was just a group of people, friends, and also mainly who knew each other. Not exactly leftists, no, because if you look at the names, possibly except for one, I wouldn't say they are all members of the underground movement. No?
Who would be more of the hardline activist in that group?
Well, I think Pete Lacaba may have connections, but I'm not saying he is. He was, but he knew people because certainly Lino Broca and Mike De Leon did not know. They were still, in terms of the politics, the right, the left, the center. I think they were still not quite in the know. I shouldn't be saying these things because I'm only presuming. But I was there, and of course I heard things, and generally it was it was Pete Lacaba who knew the politics, who knew the power plays.
And he was maybe arranging the interviews with some of the
Sure,
people.
sure. Of course, but now I'm trying to recall. Signos was after the assassination, right? Yeah, it has to be because so Free the Artist, January, February. Assassination, August. Okay, yeah. It's most likely it's a reaction to the assassination. And they shot it on Super 8. I'm sure you know that. So it had a kind of a film quality, and who else would know how to do post-production work on Super 8 except I think Mike De Leon, among all those names mentioned. Maybe Joe Quaresma. And then they transferred it to video, mainly Betamax, and then circulated it around. So that it really was underground media.
But then some of the it seems like some of the people find their way into, like Sister Stella, for instance. In Signos, there's a labor leader, Felicing Villados, who's interviewed. Ka Felicing Villados.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like there's a character of him that pops up in Sister Stella. Cadencio, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time...
Well, Sister Stella is actually, of course, written by Pete Lacaba, but it's also inspired by a number of real-life figures. The Sister Stella L would be... There's a real-life sister on which the Vilma Santos character is based on. I forgot her name now.
Christine Tan, maybe?
Christine Tan, and there's another one. There were a number of nuns who were active in the protest movement. Christine Tan is one, there's another one. It's a composite. And of course, the labor leader must have been also. Because, frankly speaking, Mike De Leon is coming from, his class status is different from the laborers. I think in this film, it's not a typical Mike De Leon film because it's not about the bourgeois, it's not about the middle class. He's out of his comfort zone. And so Pete Lacaba did a lot of contributions here to the content of the film. Strangely, it was produced by Mother Lily Monteverde, who was just riding the bandwagon. Maybe she thought, hey, I think this is timely. I think it will make money. And she does not have any political leanings at all, left or right. She's just a pure businesswoman. Yeah.
I was told that De Leon was supposed to make some mainstream films in exchange for making this one alternative film, but it never actually happened.
Well, the problem is the film flopped.
Can you talk a little bit more about how it was received or what happened?
There was a lot of ferment, in those days. You could smell it in the air, newspapers, everything. You go out in the streets. Of course, media was controlled, so you had to rely on rumors and what you heard or the underground media. Of course, producers thinking, "Hey, this is so timely, and it's in the zeitgeist." So they presume, like Mother Lily presumed. So a lot of people would want to watch Sister Stella L because it's about what's going on, what's happening. Unfortunately, when it played, it ran up against a formula movie starring the top mega star of that time, Sharon Cuneta, a rags to riches story. Ironically, well, it's produced by another company, Viva. Bukas luluhod ang mga tala. Yeah. Tomorrow, the stars will kneel down before me. And it was a hit. And unfortunately, that's where the masses went to watch, and not to Sister Stella L.
So it was basically a flop.
Yeah, it was considered a flop. I mean, in terms of revenue as compared to vis-a-vis its original budget. Meaning it did not make money.
I assume it's the same for the other films that I'm looking at, and Signos probably wasn't very widely seen.
Well, Signos is free. It was free. It's
yeah.
not a commercial film at all. So it was meant to communicate. It was more for communication purposes. It was not meant to make money, but how many people could get a Betamax legally or what? Or was it distributed in the video stores at that time? Well, not really.
But of course, Vilma Santos is a huge star at this time. But do you so is it the content the reason why it flops? Because presumably people would be interested in her.
Yeah, that was the thinking. Here's the content. It's very timely. It's about political agitation, ferment, and then you put in Vilma Santos to play the key figure, so people will watch, right? I mean, that's what the producer thought, but it did not exactly happen. So Vilma had a flop. I mean, otherwise she's usually a bankable star. You should, for the commercial, I can only tell you these things from what I heard. Of course, I don't have the exact figures, how much it costs, how much it grows. Maybe Mike De Leon is in a better position to tell you, or even the producer, Mother Lily. And of course, Bayan Ko, Kapit sa Patalim, was also made in the same vein, as a way of showing the ferment that's happening in the Philippines.
And there's a lot of crossover. Lacabo, I think, works on the script for that one as well. Philippe Salvador stars in that one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a labor leader who resembles the labor leader in Sister Stella.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like these films really, maybe Sister Stella doesn't fit into De Leon's oeuvre in the same way that Kapit sa Patalim feels like a Broca film, right?
Yeah. Kapit sa Patalim is very much a Broca film. But it's not yet his most radical film. No, he was still building it up because he started out in his earlier films like Maynila and Jaguar. He was dealing with poverty. He was dealing with marginal and financially poor people. These days, we have a term called poverty porn. During those days, when Broca was making these films, it was just called poverty. And the reason it became poverty porn because I think some filmmakers these days are still milking the whole poverty line, and because film festivals want this kind of films, even up to now. But when Broca was doing his films, it was all genuine, all the feelings, all the anger, the emotions. And Kapit Patalim was, I think, his first film that he made that he was really, I think, getting politicized as a person, as an artist, and knowing the issues. Because again, it post Aquino assassination. The whole landscape changed, politically speaking, after Aquino was assassinated. And this came out not just in film, but in several other art forms. I mean, you should go to the painting, social realism figured but social realism already came out much earlier, even way before the Aquino assassination.
And Broca was working with that in the 70s, I guess.
No. The thing is, the art forms were separate from each other. They were not working together or that, no.
What was social realism?
But Broca came from theater, PETA, Philippine Educational Theater Association, whose headquarters is just nearby, in E. Rodriguez. And PETA also already was developing some kind of political theater. And then in the visual arts, you have to look at the art forms in concert. It's not like it's only happening in film or there's a book edited by Nick Johnson, The Politics of Culture, I think.
Yes. And so they talk about, Chongson talks about two things really, I guess national democracy and mass orientation as the two sort of major themes that artists were dealing with. Which those are sort of like leftist themes that maybe you can trace it back to to Maoism or Marxism.
Sure. But these artists I'm talking about, like Lino Broca or Mike De Leon, they're not leftists. What I mean to say is politically, I mean, they're not card-carrying leftists or what, but you can see where their sentiments are. It's because it was the Times. The Times called for them to take this kind of action, and they don't have to come out and say, "Hey, I am a communist," or because they're not. And there are other people who could actually advise them on the politics of the left. So they just did their art. I think it would be good if you also compare what was happening in the other arts, particularly in visual arts and in theater, because I think they were moving in parallel. No, in film it happened a bit later. In theater and especially in visual arts, much earlier.
In the early 70s,
Yeah, well,
the first quarter storm.
not early 70s. I would say starting in the, because I was attending exhibits and I would see a lot of social realist art. You see, but the social realist art then was the underground. If you go to the cultural center, what was official art? What was the art they displayed? It was avant-garde. It was conceptual.
So this actually kind of the social realism kind of permeates mass culture, but through cinema, as it were.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking of the arts, because I work with the arts, so I'm familiar with different kinds of artists. And of course, Broca came from theater, and especially PETA, which of course had a history of being a kind of a firebrand, revolutionary type of theater, that they were espousing. You might say protest theater, and especially coming from the colleges too, especially from University of the Philippines. I was a student at UP from the 1975 to 79, and you could see, of course, they didn't use the term yet. I would say, something like the Occupy movement. You have these lightning rallies, they just happen, unannounced, because there was also a lot of militarization going on. You're in school and then you hear about, hey, be careful about one of your classmates. He's a planted military agent. Because they were trying to spy and find, hey, where are the communists here? We have to, they're on the lookout for people from the underground who are working there, to recruit, to do agitation.
Well, let's get back to Bayanco. They set up Malaya Films, and it's Tony Gonzalez, and he's a wealthy person at this point, you mentioned?
Yes, very rich, yeah.
Can you talk about what happened behind the scenes as that film was coming together?
I don't know Tony Gonzalez. All I know is suddenly Lino Broca's making this film, Kapit sa Patalim, and for a film festival, for Cannes. And I don't know how Tony Gonzalez came into the picture. Tony Gonzalez actually is a close family friend of the Aquinos. So this may have been the connection. And then so maybe when Lino was going to make this film, which is of course not exactly about the protest movement, but dealing with poverty, dealing with some of this ferment that's going on during that time. This was 83, 84, post-Aquino assassination. There was a movement called Justice for Aquino, Justice for All movement. And so there was this melange of protesters, people who were angry at what happened, what was going on. And it's really a motley group of leftists, righties, centrists, rich people, poor people. They banded together because of the same cause. And I think this is here because Tony Gonzalez was a very rich businessman. I don't exactly know where he made. I think he made his fortune in the Tupperware business. So I think he came on and said, hey, and met Lino Broca and said, hey, I can finance your film. But it was just a one-off because Tony Gonzalez was not really a film producer. He was just a financier. He had the money. And Lino Broca, okay, if you're thinking this is he made the film for the cause, I think you have to be a little more understated about that because like Sister Stella L, it was because Sister Stella L, the producers thought it would make a profit. In Bayanco, it was to be shown at the Cannes Film Festival. In a way, it was being commissioned.
Stefan Films was the partner as well.
Yes.
And that's Rissant, or was Rissant involved?
Derry Shan, who was the impresario, who was trying to build up Lino Broca.
Can you talk a little bit about how those two forces worked or didn't work together in the film? Rissant and Gonzalez, or Stefan and Malaya?
Well, Stefan Films was a French production company because you needed to have a French producer in order for the film to have a French nationality. So it's a French-Filipino co-production. And also for business purposes, it had to be French company involved. So it's easier to release the film in France. Remember, hey, this is business. And whatever makes good business, if it's about political ferment and it's making world headlines, hey, that's good business. I mean, some people will run after my neck. Filmmaking is very expensive. Except for Signos, because Signos, that was really, I think, from the heart. That was all those involved, they really were angry and agitated and saying, let's do something about this. So it was meant for a film festival. Cannes, to be precise.
Not so much for a domestic audience, actually.
Well, for a while it was being bruited about that the film might be banned, it could not be shown. But when you actually watch the film, it's just about a factory worker who kind of goes berserk because he was treated unfairly. There was a miscarriage of justice. He could not get his kid into the hospital because he had to give a down payment. It was not about the politics at all. Of course, it mirrored the times. It was angry. It was about the poor getting a raw deal out of life. But there was nothing overtly political in it. And eventually it was shown during the Marcos period.
I guess maybe the only exception is there's rallies, live rallies in the film. The Adam group,
Well, I have to watch the film again. I don't recall now. I don't know if the rallies were real or staged.
they're actually real.
Real, okay.
And the story is Rasan, how do you pronounce it?
Rishan.
He's doing the sound for the film. And so he's actually working on the production. And Broca is attending these rallies, and Rishan is telling Broca to stop attending the rallies and focus on the film. So it seems like there's almost a pull between whether this is a kind of a melodrama or a dramatic film. And then you have live footage from rallies inserted in. So it's a little bit like Haskell Wexler's Medium Cool, where he literally,
right.
But it's not as orchestrated.
Real footage and orchestrated footage and all that. Yeah. I know what you mean. But there was nothing that says, hey, this rally is. I don't know. I don't know if you look at the streamers or what, but this rally actually happened and it's against the government, Philippine government, things like that. As far as I was concerned, when I saw the film, it was a work of fiction, but of course based on realities. So, like I said, it was really actually commissioned to be shown in Cannes. And Rishan was a very shrewd impresario. He knew that this was the time that he could. I speak because I also know Rishan. I've known Lino when he was alive. And I know how these things work, how directors get famous, and what festivals like Cannes are looking for. The more controversial you are, the more they like you, the more they can promote you. And I think Rishan hit the spot here because suddenly he was Lino in Cannes, and then, of course, showing the film. The film was not exactly about the political situation. It was just about some poor guy who went through hard times and had this kind of a bleak prospects, in his life. But when Lino was in Cannes, he said many things. He even wore a Barong Tagalog with the map of the Philippines. And there was something, God save us or something. I think I still have some of those clippings when Lino went to Cannes.
Ah, really?
Yeah.
I'd be interested in.
And so, of course, it created waves. It created controversy in Cannes. And then Lino, when he returns, I just don't know if it happened before or after. When was Bayanco? 85, 84? Because I remember in 83, I was in Hong Kong Film Festival. Pierre Richan was there. And he was already talking about, this, or was it 84? I'm getting mixed up now. He was talking, I heard it on the phone. Please tell Tony Gonzalez, he must pay for the subtitles. And some of these producers can be very shrewd.
Well, Kapitsa Pantalimus, I guess it was sort of
Right.
calculated
Yes.
project to make a splash on the international.
Right. It was successful because Lino really you might even say it's Lino's coming out film, as a political firebrand, as a radical. And then later on, with another film and theater director, he would also be jailed, for spearheading an anti-censorship rally. That's another story.
Can we compare Bayanco to Bangkang Papel sa Tagak ng Apoy? Maybe it's kind of the outlier in this, because Estrada is not necessarily known for his political films, of course.
Not. See, Bangkang Papel is a strange bedfellow to the Sister Stella and Bayanco, because certainly there were no political sideshow, or political context. There was no political context to why it was made at all. Bangkang Papel was based on a novel written by Edgardo Reyes, who became famous after he wrote Maynila. Maynila was written in the 60s. It was a serialized novel. And then Lino Broca and Mike De Leon turned it into a film in 1975. And then some other Edgardo Reyes novels were also filmed, but without much distinction, forgotten because the directors were not so good. And then Edgardo Reyes at that point decided, hey, I also want to become a film director. So he adapted one of his earlier novels, Bangkang Papel, which, if you look at the content, subject matter, also dealt with the poor, with social concerns, with poverty. But personally, I think it had no political agenda except to ride on the wave of what was going on at that time.
So in a way, it was also calculated, just like Sister Stella, to
Yeah,
potentially
yeah.
resonate.
But Sister Stella, I will have to add something I think very relevant later because it goes from the realm of fiction into documentary.
That's what Rose says, that they cut, Mother Lily cut the end of it when it does that.
No. Mother Lily never cut anything.
Okay. It was
Mike De Leon added to it, but
For the
only
internet.
for the exported version.
Can you explain that quickly then before we forget that?
Well, okay, in 1984, remember, Mike was also doing, I don't know whether it was an afterthought or he had been documenting because there was this major street rally. It's not quite a street rally, actually. It's a park rally there, the entire Rizal Park. And literally, it was filled up. I'm telling you, 1 million people, I don't know. It could be maybe 500,000. It was really full, shoulder to shoulder, very, very big rally. And then it was symbolic because you had all these peasants, farmers, laborers, citizens marching in from the north and from the south of Luzon. I don't know about Visayas and Mindanao because of course you have to cross water. But really, citizens from the north of Luzon, from the south, from everywhere, they just converged in Rizal Park. It was called Lakad Bayan. So, and I think Corazon Aquino was there. She being the widow of the slain former senator. I even bumped into Lina Broca there. So it was a major rally, very historic, very angry rally. But when Filipinos do these things, it's also very cheerful. It's like a fiesta. And Mike De Leon had the brilliant idea, hey, I will document this, but not on Super 8 anymore, on 35mm film. Of course, he had the team to do it, and he had the money. So they just, his crew just went there, shoot. So when he made Sister Stella L, of course, it was shown locally. There were no problems because there was nothing specific mentioned in the film that, hey, this is against Marcos. Hey, this is about Manila right now. Hey, this has to do with the Aquino assassination. No, none of those things were mentioned in the film. But when the film got invited abroad, it was actually supposed to be invited to Cannes Film Festival, same as Bayan Ko, Kapit sa Patalim. It was already being invited. Then suddenly it got pulled out because of the intervention of one Pierre Richan, who said, I'm promoting only one director.
Ah, wow. Yeah. So I heard that it was because there were no subtitles, but that's not...
Bullshit. No. It was political. Film festival politics. Hey, Philippines there. Who's the best director that we can promote? Oh, here's this radical, Lina Broca. Okay, we shut off everyone else. Hey, that's real. I know that. I know those things.
Did that...
Of course, film festivals will tell you, no, that's not true.
Did that cause problems between Broca and De Leon?
Yeah, eventually the two of them had another falling out. I mean, they got together already because of politics, and now because of film festival politics, they were apart again. So a lot of these things I'm telling you are off the record.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But if you want to show them, no problem. Because I don't speak the truth. Because I was a witness. And I'm only saying these things because you're interviewing me.
Right.
Otherwise, I wouldn't say them.
So the extra scene was added, 35mm live.
Yeah, it was added to the film. Okay, this thing. So it got pulled out from Cannes, and Mike was so angry. And he was really blaming Pierre Richan. Because Pierre Richan earlier was also shutting out another filmmaker from the festival scene. And saying, there's only one filmmaker, Broca. The one he was shutting out was Kidlat Tahimik. He was going around saying, what a bad filmmaker he is. Of course, Kidlat just last month was proclaimed a national artist. So it was pulled out from Cannes. But Mike had friends in the film scene in Paris. And so, okay, let's just show it at the Cinematheque and all that. But somebody pulled strings, and you know what? The film got invited to the main competition in Venice. And many people did not know it got invited to Venice because Mike was just hush-hush about it. So it was in the main competition in Venice, and that's where Mike added the extra scenes, the documentary scenes that you really see placards, against the government, saying, and then there was one sequence in which he had all these streamers and placards coming, artists, farmers, laborers. It was really multi-sectoral. And I would say very powerful sequence because it comes after the actual ending of the film. If you see the copies of it today, on video or on television, it ends with Vilma Santos making her speech. If we do not stand together, how will we unite? If we do not act now, when do we act? See? And then it ends. Then the end. Credits roll out. Weak ending. But the version shown in Venice, I actually saw it in Hong Kong Film Festival because it was the same copy that was shown. And it ends, I would say maybe 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes.
And there's a song playing in the background.
No. Actually, no. There was no music. It was all, I don't recall any music. I just recall documentary shots, natural sound, people assembling at the park. And then you read all the placards. Then you know this is the real thing.
Is there a reason why that was never shown in the Philippines, even posthumously, that version?
You have to ask Mike De Leon.
Speaking of experimentation, he talks about, he references Brecht in Signos. He quotes Brecht's poem To Posterity. And then with this scene that you're talking about, I guess it's kind of like a Brechtian effect.
Okay, here's the effect when I saw it in Hong Kong during the 1985 Hong Kong International Film Festival, where it also played with Bayan Co in the festival. I was watching with an audience of Filipino maids working in Hong Kong. See, so of course they were there not because the film has rallies, it's politically charged. They were there for Vilma Santos. Well, I don't think I recall how they all reacted. But of course, the theater was packed. Not a big theater, maybe 300 to 400 seats, but it was full, mostly Filipino maids. The effect for me was after Vilma Santos gave her speech, of course, I know, that's all fiction, right? And then Mike inserts the documentary scenes, the real thing. And I was there. I was there during the rally. It is really powerful.
How about the Reyes film? Let's go back to the Reyes film. There's maybe in a way it's not as powerful as the De Leon film, even though it does focus on labor organizing. What was your impression from watching that?
Yeah, as a moviegoer, as a cineast, it was no big, it was nothing to me because there was no political charge or context to it. It was just like, it's an old novel of Mr. Reyes and he just made it. And I do not know, maybe because the subject was topical during that time. So because unlike Broca, unlike Bayan Co, unlike Sister Stella, there's a backstory. And there were real political sides being taken on. But for Reyes, there was nothing. There was no backstory. It's just a film that was made. So it's nothing. I will not even consider it really as a political film.
I guess it's that one's I think it's JE Productions, Rich Films.
Yeah,
JE. Are the
JE.
producers?
That's the production company of Estrada, who was a known Marcos follower.
Right.
Yeah. So what was it about? Was it saying something against the government? Was it saying? But because if you do not put in the political context, you just say, because this is something universal, it just happened. Then I think there's no bite to the work, and that's what I felt when I saw it.
Just the bosses are the antagonists, and
it's a labor union kind of film. That's all. And you're the good guys, you're the bad guys, the rich, the poor. But there's no bite because there's no backstory to it. See? I do not know what are the politics of Edgardo Reyes. I don't know his background. He's just a well-known novelist.
How about Estrada? He plays the lead in this film.
Well, most of his films, he plays that, no? Oppressed, downtrodden, and that's what got him elected to the presidency. Of course, in real life, he's part of the elite. Movie image and real life are two different things.
How do you feel about his performances? And maybe this is probably not one of his best films, but he still has this strong character that he plays in the film.
Well, up to that time, he was still a popular actor. He still had a mass following, which is why when he got elected president, I think he had the highest number of votes ever by a Philippine president up to that time. There was really no contest. And of course, that image carried on to his political life.
There's also some of the, Paquito Diaz plays the antagonist in this film. He's in the Bayan Co film. Can you talk a little bit about some of the stars crossover between these films? Like Paquito Diaz is one.
They're just performing the roles. They're just professional actors. It's just a job for them. I don't think Paquito Diaz was acting in Bayan Co and saying, hey, I'm doing something patriotic, this is a protest film. I don't think he thinks like that. It's just like, hey, I'll just do my job. I've been hired, I'll do my job, I'll get paid, and that's it. And same thing with Bangkang Papel, if he's also there. There's nothing more to it. That it's just a professional job as an actor.
So it's a quarter till one. Do you have time to talk about the Sakuku ng Agila? Or?
Sa Kuko ng Agila is, remember, during that time, the US bases issue was just very topical. It was hot. It was really, are you for or against the US bases? And I think Estrada had already become a senator by then.
It's 1989. So
Yeah.
yes, he's a senator.
Yeah, he was already a senator. No. In fact, he got a fellow senator, Nikki Coseteng, to be his leading lady there.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, she did not act at all. I mean, a mannequin. I think it was made to capitalize and to give credit to ERAP, to Estrada. Maybe he really had intentions to let the public know about this issue. That the U.S. bases are a problem, and it has caused so much dissension and disharmony, for the Philippines. So maybe that's his contribution to film history and history. It helped in telling people that, hey, this is what the bases have done to us as a people.
And I understand neither one really made much money. Estrada was more or less bankrolling. I've heard.
Well, I don't know
both
the
of
box
these-
office figures. I'm not into the business. But certainly they were not box office blockbusters.
Cine Suerte kind of find it so niche in this sort of action films.
Cine Suerte did several kinds of films. They had sex comedies, they had action films, they had not that interesting actually. What was their most famous film? See, I cannot even recall. They were not in the business for long.
They even did one on Commander Dante.
There were films on Commander Dante, on Victor Corpus, on Father Balweg, the rebel priest. All of these things, they were topical. These were well-known figures. Despite their political leanings, I think all the producers who made the films not because they wanted to say something or they wanted to project a certain kind of politics, but it's just like Mother Lily. Like they wanted to make money because these figures are well known and controversial. So it's just business. Now, what about the filmmakers behind them? Well, some of them were commissioned. Some of them, I don't think. I think if you want films that really came out integrally from the convictions of the filmmakers, you have to go into the documentaries. Now, a lot of this commercial stuff were really, really commercial stuff.
So more of the Asia Visions and Alta Horizons.
Oh, sure. And because they had a purpose, and they also maybe politically had that kind of orientation, no? To make films that were dealing with the marginal lives and the struggles of the poor. And I think they also wanted to agitate and also change things for the better, of course.
Maybe like Manila sa mga Kuko ng Liwanag and like Jaguar, these films with Philippe Salvador that Broca does, in some ways they feel more powerful than like Kapit sa Patalim. What about Salvador, and is there a change from the 70s to the 80s in the Broca films?
Well, Broca's last film that was really done with a clenched face, I think, was Ora Pro Nobis. That was 89, and it was done for a foreign company, Canon Films. Also premiered in Cannes. But of course, by this time, Broca's politics was very blatant already and apparent. When he was doing Maynila, he was doing Jaguar. I think he was still a kind of neophyte in terms of politics. But the anger you see in his films, that's genuine, because I know Broca to be a very much against injustices, and like when the crew would eat, he would eat the same food as everybody. He will not go into his own hole and eat more expensive fare than the others. He will eat what the other workers are eating.
Interesting.
So if you're trying to ram down a political line to some of these films, well, I just told you that the real reason some of these films were made.